This is Show Money, Episode 3. I'm Paul Gibb from Bloody Elbow, and once again, we're joined by John Nash from Bloody Elbow and Jason Cruz from MMA Payout, who promises that you can hear him this time and understand every single word that he says. Today, we're going to talk about three things primarily. We're going to talk about Rampage and the Bellator lawsuit, give you an update on the Antitrust case with regard to the fighters' filings on the motion to dismiss and to transfer venues, and then talk a little bit about the Phil Davis signing and what that might mean in terms of competitive environment between these promotions. So with that, we'll get started. Toss it over to Jason Cruz, who's going to fill you in a little bit on Rampage and the Bellator lawsuit.
So if everybody was awaiting Rampage's re-debut with the UFC on April 25th, we're going to have to disappoint you because on April 7th, a New Jersey court granted a preliminary injunction from Bellator, which basically precludes Rampage Jackson from fighting on that UFC card next week. Just to back up a little bit, Rampage and Bellator had a contract dispute over Rampage's current contract with Bellator. Bellator filed a lawsuit once it heard that it was Rampage was negotiating with the UFC, and then filed this injunction last month. So essentially, the court granted the injunction, citing that on clear and convincing evidence that Bellator would be more likely to Bellator would be likely to prevail on their breach of contract claim against Rampage. So essentially, even though the case is not yet over, and we still have it still may happen that Rampage may prevail later on down the road, is the case effectively over?
Maybe.
You gonna take that, John?
Yeah, okay. I don't know if it's effectively over. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I have no knowledge. I'm not a legal expert. I have no knowledge either way if it's effectively over, but it doesn't look good for Rampage. I know they're trying to do an emergency relief on the injunction, try to get an emergency decision, but I don't see that working. I don't even know if it's, they've already been taken off the card, and I don't know how they would gain it. I guess the one argument they could make, I don't know if, do you have to put a bond down in New Jersey when you do an injunction?
I think, yeah,
in some states it's required.
And I think that basically it's essentially over. They should have filed that appeal a while back if they were going to make an emergency appeal. So I think it's effectively over. I guess the one question maybe from here, where does Rampage go? Does he go back to Bellator? Does he sit out? Does he just try to make movies?
Yeah, I imagine if he still wants to fight. Well, there's still a trial. I mean, if they really are confident, and again, we don't know all the information because this was an injunction hearing, so there might be a lot more evidence that Rampage could present in the case, and we might get a lot of evidence that Bjorn made verbal promises, a lot stronger verbal promises by not just Bjorn, but maybe Kevin Kay and Spike. And in that case, maybe he'll triumph. But I was actually frankly disappointed when I saw the actual allegations, because I thought it sounded like there were stronger allegations than what was promised him, and it didn't seem that. Even though technically Bellator might not have completed every letter to the agreement by not giving him his written pay-per-view, how many pay-per-views were sold, they technically went above and beyond, paying him the cash bonus to make up for any lost sales. So I was a little disappointed in that, but who knows? Maybe there's more information coming to win. But from the looks of it, I don't see him winning the case the way it looks right now, and I think that was why, in a weird way, I don't know if you saw the statement given by Bellator when they won the injunction, that they made sure that people knew that the statement didn't come from Scott Coker. And I'm wondering if part of it is that Scott's playing the nice guy, so that if he has to come back, that Scott did nothing to antagonize him and enrage him about it, that he is the nice guy again. He can welcome back. Hey, we can still work together. I had no real comments about it, and I'm the good guy. I'm the good cop, and someone else got to play the bad cop. Paul, your thoughts on it?
And I was surprised at. I mean, I would be surprised if the case doesn't go away, because to me, the judge is essentially sending a signal: get this case out of here. Don't even bring it back. I was amazed at how strongly she ripped and reamed Rampage's side. I was one of the people who thought the injunction would hold, but for one main reason. It was that I thought that Bellator had Rampage dead to rights on the right to match clause, right? Which basically says you can breach for whatever reason you want to, but we still own a right to match. If you sign with someone else, we get a right to match that. That seemed abundantly clear just to, as a non-lawyer reading through the contract. But the judge just ripped him and reamed him in every single place that she could. It was basically like, why the hell is this thing in front of my court? Get out of here.
Well, I think the big mistake they made too is in the presentation they admitted that the reason they could have maybe presented a better argument for why, but they said they only wanted the knowledge of what the pay-per-view points were to access what the budget was for advertising, for marketing.
Right.
And they're like, well, then that doesn't matter. They're admitting we really don't care what the pay-per-view sales were. We thought but the contract includes that you have no control over marketing. So it's like you're admitting that you had no interest in the actual pay-per-views, and so they kind of caught themselves. I mean, if they can go back and explain better, and like I said, who knows? Maybe they do have more information and there were stronger promises made, but based on that, it did not look good for them.
And I think that, John, you hit it right, nail right on the head. It just seemed as though the court just kind of pushed aside some of the stronger arguments that Rampage's team had with respect to, hey, they breached the contract because they didn't provide us the pay-per-view numbers. Well, in the court opinion, the judge goes, well, you got the numbers, didn't you? Doesn't matter, even if the contract said that. Basically, I think the word was substantially comply. And so yeah. I think there was a sense from the opinion that the judge was looking at this saying, this guy makes a ton of money. What's he complaining about, really? He got all this money, even though they didn't have to give it to him, and now he wants to break free from the contract. It just seemed that that's the tone and tenor I got from the opinion. The other thing that I think that is key to point out here is that there was a lot of emphasis, I thought anyway, that they put on the notoriety and fame of Rampage and the fact that Bellator essentially argued that they built him up and had a reputation, and if he were to jump ship and leave for the UFC, what it would do to Bellator's reputation. I thought that was an interesting point that the court picked up on, and I'm not sure in the moving papers how strongly Bellator argued that or how strongly they did that at oral argument, but that was something that I would think that would be more of a lesser argument, but it seemed to sway the judge.
Did you guys notice too, and this was I found very fascinating when they laid that sentence out that a successful promotion needs fighters that have the notoriety gained from winning and or notoriety, however they phrased it. That was almost word for word verbatim from what the class action lawsuit complaint was describing elite MMA fighters.
Right.
I was like, wow, okay. I didn't know if anybody else noticed that, but I don't, but I found that fascinating. But anyways, back to Rampage. We'll talk about that in the future. But back to the Rampage case. The other thing interesting is how quickly it seemed the UFC distanced themselves from the case. That they described it that it was presented to them that he had that his contract was in breach, and basically they took their hands off and said we played no part in this. So I found that fascinating too.
I definitely think that was an interesting point that they pushed him. They had him on the week before on the UFC Fight Night card on Saturday afternoon, interviewing to promote the fight. They promoted him a lot, essentially with the inference that they felt strongly about his case, and they didn't talk about his legal issues with Bellator or whatnot. And you get the sense that Bellator basically has a claim for interference with a contractual relationship here if they wanted to press the UFC, because in the moving papers, I think it was a Scott Coker declaration, indicates that they notified the UFC of what was going on. In some of the news items or interviews, I believe that Rampage's people indicated that they had talked with the UFC. So whether or not that is true is essentially an interesting point, because you can make the argument that there was some sort of tampering going on.
Well, I think MMA Fighting, I think, was an interview with, I think it was Ariel Helwani with Anthony McGann, Rampage's manager. I think he said not only have our people looked at our lawyers, but the UFC lawyers have looked at it. And
right.
And which is pretty strong statement. And we know Scott Coker called UFC December 4th to tell him that he's still under contract, and we know they emailed him. So it's if the if a interference suit comes up, this also sets a bizarre thing where if the UFC wants to claim that Rampage's people misrepresented them, they could end up suing Rampage to lay all the blame on him. Why Bellator could end up suing the UFC to get Rampage to come back and tying Rampage up for months or even another year.
Exactly.
So
if they wanted to, let's
what
hope it doesn't.
What do you guys think the UFC's strategy or motivation was here? Because I mean, even if they didn't see Rampage's contract, everybody they know the effective details of a Bellator contract now, right? And so we know the important terms, right? What would you say? There's no way the UFC didn't have an idea that they were going to lose, or that Rampage was going to lose. It seems unfathomable to me. So what do you think? What would you suspect is going on from the UFC side here?
Well, I'm just going to say what other people told me. Some rumors, the rumor mongers, the theories they have. Because I'm not, like I said, I'm not a legal expert. I wouldn't guess myself, but I'm going to bite my tongue on one rumor that I won't say right now. I'll save that for later. That I really like one theory, but the other one I heard is that when Bellator responded to Rampage talking to the UFC, that Rampage's people went to the UFC and said they breached our contract, presented it to the UFC. When Bellator responded, they used such vague language. In other words, we think that Rampage is still under contract. In other words, they weren't so clear-cut that the UFC lawyers looked at it and said, well, it doesn't really matter. There's nothing that we can take the gamble and say that he breached, it looks like they might have breached his contract, and we can take the gamble and sign him and have no repercussions. So might as well do it. That's a theory that I've been told. And it seems more realistic to me because, I can't imagine the UFC just going, oh, yeah, he's 100% under contract. Let's sign the guy.
Right, but so they know that he's got, the thing that I think is strongest is right to match, right? They know that he's still got right to match, so that even when you sign him, he has to take that back to Bellator and give him the chance to match. And then he didn't do that, and then this lawsuit is going on, and that this is.
Yeah, well, first we could do a whole episode on how crappy MMA contracts are, but that's a different subject. The whole right to match just drives me nuts that they have these weird, these rules that I think are just absolutely insane. These laws that couldn't pass anywhere else, that MMA contracts can have this. But everybody knows the theory. A lot of people running theories that the UFC saw that Bellator was getting ratings and said, hey, let's just screw with them. Let's take, this is a theory a lot of people have argued, that they said, let's just sign Rampage. Well, if he fights for us, great. We have a new star, a guy that can generate revenue. If he can't fight for us, great. He can't fight for Bellator. He's stuck in court. And that's, I'm not saying that's true, but that's the argument a lot of people, that's what's running through a lot of people's heads, that was the motivation.
I agree with that. I think you guys know that I have an extra theory there, that I agree with everything you just said, except also they said to themselves, well, if we go through and lose this, at least we'll get his contract officially in a public document, and his contract is from, what is it? 2013, something like that, right? Smack dab in the middle of the antitrust case period, and that it can be now used as evidence in the antitrust case. That's what I also think might be happening. And Jason seems to think I'm overthinking it.
Well, I just think that I tend to think that a lot of great legal work is pure dumb luck. And perhaps that, I think that it could be a strategy that they could have seen. I also, I'm a little less inclined to think that UFC would mess with them, just for the fact is, like, why would you want to pay your lawyers to do all that stuff and have to deal with it, and maybe with the potential of getting a loss. I'm not sure if they just thought that hey, Bellator, Rampage is a headache. We know he's a headache. You know, if he thinks his contract is up, how much of a fight is Bellator going to put up in wanting him back, especially if he's going to be a malcontent? And so, you know, it kind of goes also to the fact that, you know, the UFC is looking to still, you know, find stars to bulk up their pay-per-views, and it kind of goes to the fact that, you know, have they not, you know, homegrown enough stars to need Rampage still, or I don't know. That's just kind of my figure.
You know, what's really fascinating too about Paul's crazy theory, which is insane, but okay. But one is that 3 weeks before, they had several weeks before the suit, they would have to decide to do this, to get a hold of them, get them out, to get the contract leaked, which is possible. So their contract coming out probably helps them in the suit that they have this. Well, you think Discovery would let them get the contract out anyways too? They wouldn't have to have done this, but that contract does kind of help the UFC, showing there's competition. What's interesting is Rampage's complaint of why he wants out of Bellator and why he thinks they breached their contract partly helps the class action suit, because his argument is that they didn't put the marketing needed into his fight to sell the pay-per-views, and that they don't have the talent available. That's why the Roy Jones Jr. fight was so important to him, is this Roy Jones Jr. and Tito. In other words, he's saying they don't have the competition, the opponents, to put me up again to sell enough pay-per-views to make this contract worthwhile, which is, you know, so on both hands. One, it's like, wow, there is a great offer out there from Bellator for fighters, so that shows there's competition. On the other hand, when you get there, there's no one to put them against to sell enough pay-per-views to make that contract worthwhile. It's a catch, you know, it's a give with one hand, take away with the other. Right. Fascinating. Anyways, that was
the importance of the network effect. The one other thing I would add is I think it was on MMA. On MMA Tonight, was it? Phil Davis was saying that he thought Bellator came out a loser in this, and I couldn't disagree with him more. I think there was a little bit of sort of game theory going on here, in that Bellator essentially had to react with full force here when one of their major, you know, premier fighters is wanting to leave. And they've fought it tooth and nail and kept him away from the UFC, and not only won, but won in a strong way from the judge. To me, that was really important for Bellator as a signal out there, and they were able to keep Scott Coker kind of out of it and his hands clean, right?
Yeah.
But as a signal to say, look, you can't just decide to run out on your contract, no matter who you are. That to me is a very important victory that I think they took away from this, and the judge really smacked Rampage down in the middle of doing it.
You know, so I think this is completely different than the Eddie Alvarez situation, where, you know, Eddie Alvarez's deal was free, and people viewed that as, oh, you have this trick language with this matching clause to prevent a guy from getting a better deal. I mean, the optics of this as Rampage is, you got a good deal and you're just not happy with the overall result. Maybe you see like, oh, instead of completing the deal, I can get a better deal by going to the UFC. It doesn't have the same look of a guy being prevented from going on to a better contract. It's a guy that wants to, you know, after he's regained his luster with 3 wins in the Bellator, to now cash in at the better deal.
Right.
Halfway through it. So it doesn't quite have the same fighter getting screwed type optic. But who knows? Like I said, if it goes to case, you never know if there's evidence presented that a lot stronger promises were made that we haven't seen yet. But what I've seen hasn't blown me away yet.
Yeah. So real quick, Jason, do you think it's done?
Oh, I think it's done. I mean, I don't. I think that they'll come up with some sort of settlement. I actually thought that before the injunction hearing would happen, that they would come up with some sort of agreement which would release Rampage to the UFC. But you know, it worked out the best for Bellator. I think also one of the things that I wanted to point out is that, okay, Rampage, he lives in Irvine. Bellator's headquarters is in Irvine, yet they file suit in New Jersey. it's just an interesting thing. And then Rampage on Instagram argues that he was basically hometown. Like they found a judge that would agree with what Bellator was saying, which I thought was hilarious. But to round back to your question, I think that at a certain point that the sides will come to some sort of agreement. Like John had indicated, maybe Scott Coker works his personal skills and kind of welcomes Rampage back into the mix of Bellator, and then they just let this lawsuit go away. I don't think it benefits anybody for them to incur more legal costs and go to trial for, I don't even know what you really are gaining from that.
Yeah, the reason it's in New Jersey is so they're not under California regulation for contracts. That's also why the UFC is in Vegas, because UFC, none of the major promotions are putting it in California because they give you more protection, and they actually enforce it, unlike Quebec, which apparently doesn't enforce their regulation.
Exactly, which is hilarious. Because I'm sure that Bellator and Rampage is like 15 minutes away, but I don't know. Yeah. Having practiced in Orange County, I'm not sure how that would have played out.
Yeah, it's. I wish they. That's what was made Strikeforce contracts so much. They're not. They're amazing, but that what made them, better for the fighters than other promotions, because they were a California-based company and had California contracts. There's a 5-year max or stuff. So that's something else. Again, that's a future episode probably on contracts. Just how much I hate them.
It looks like Bellator sues everyone in New Jersey when they can, from what I see. But
well, that's their base there. I guess when they first started the company, they decided that that's the perfect place to set up shop, because that'll be our Vegas, Nevada court for. But speaking of which, now we're speaking about venue and everything. That's a perfect segue into the other event that happened.
That is really quick. I'm mixing up my shows inside MMA. Not MMA Tonight is like a weird mixture of Inside MMA and UFC Tonight. But anyway, Phil Davis on Inside MMA said that
Inside MMA on Access TV.
There we go. Came out a loser, and I disagree with that. But so, transitioning to the antitrust lawsuit, we've reached a slow period. We got filings after filings after filings, and now we've reached a point where we go, month or two without in between filings. And so this past Friday was. Did you expect the motion to transfer filing, John? Because I didn't know that one was coming.
All I had is on my calendar. It said this week was supposed to be filed, and and I always and I don't want to give away my secret because everybody seems to not know. All I do is I check Pacer at the end of the day every day to see what came on. But I guess me and you are the only people. Us three are the only people that does that, and that's how I don't want to give away our big scoops, but that's how I do it. I just saw, oh my God, there was stuff posted.
Yeah.
So
our big scoops. Mine is I get 5 alerts a day. And that comes to my phone, and if something's on there, I say, "Hey, something happened."
Yeah, I think something happened today, but I don't, I'll have to check when I get up. But it seemed like something was filed today, but I'm not sure what.
There was some filing yesterday, but it was a random I think errata of sheet of something. But
it looked like it was a 2-pager or something. So it was something. It couldn't have been that important, like a signature probably.
I think there was a motion to advance that hearing too. So I don't know if that's been decided either. So which basically moved the hearing forward.
Yeah, that was decided. That was I think that was thrown out. That was decided in favor. The plaintiffs won one. They won not to move it forward.
So what we had on Friday was I was expecting the motion to dismiss, or the fighter response to Zuffa's motion to dismiss, and then we also got fighters' official opposition to the motion to transfer venue. In the motion to transfer venue, they basically point to 2 main things. One is they say you can't use the contractual terms of the UFC fighter contracts. They all say that if you sue us related to this contract, it has to be in Nevada, and the fighters are arguing, and I agree with them, that this is something completely different, and that when it's an antitrust case, the language we have in our employment contract doesn't matter anymore. But that's the first UFC argument, and so the fighters are attacking that, saying that this is an antitrust case, so the terms of the employment contract don't matter. And then also they go into things like it's convenient for a number of parties here, right? And we know that 2 fighters were recently added to the suit that live in the area. The UFC hasn't minded litigating cases in Northern California in the past when it suits their interests. In terms of location of documents, like a lot of stuff is electronic these days, so that shouldn't matter anymore. And then we get into the motion to dismiss. And the main things that I took away, I wrote a piece on this, and my main takeaway from the fighters' opposition to the motion to dismiss is that they did not seem to fall into the trap of trying to add a bunch of extra detail, specificity, and information to try to make sure that their claims reach this Twombly plausibility standard. It looks like they didn't throw much more in there, and they're basically saying, let's see what the judge thinks, but that was my takeaway. What we also got in that filing, though, was we got a better understanding of why the fighters have a monopoly claim in there in the first place. They have this monopoly leads to monopsony, which leads to fighters getting harmed type of argument, and we've never seen that before, at least to my knowledge. And then we have good old John's Carlos Newton theory. It all matters. Everything matters. The whole shebang into one. That was what John said. Carlos Newton said that every single thing matters collectively. And we have that. We have the fighters' response to basically the UFC trying to pick them apart one by one, and then the fighters saying, no, everything matters. You have to analyze it collectively. All right. So what was your, when you guys looked through those documents, what stood out the most to you? So what one area, either one, transfer or motion to dismiss? What was the one thing that stood out the most to you when looking through those?
Paul, Jason, you go first.
Well, I think that I think with the motion to transfer, I think it boils down to the forum selection clauses in the contracts and what the court thinks of it. Basically, whether it's applicable or not. I think that boils down to the essence of the transfer argument, and it's going to hinge on whether the San Jose court judge deems that whether it's antitrust is precluded from the contractual interpretation of what all the fighters signed. So that's what it boils down to. It boils down to everything else. I feel is a little important, but yet not as important as the forum selection clauses. I think that what was interesting in that motion to transfer venue of response was that they bring up a lot of these. There's more antitrust cases in San Jose than there are in Nevada, and this court knows more about antitrust than Nevada does. And I guess those are good arguments. I'm not sure how much weight that a court will take into that. I mean, all I could see a judge just kind of rolling their eyes, is like, yeah, more work for us. But I do think, though, that there is some validity into those arguments because the court is more efficient in understanding those arguments. I know by anecdotal states, my wife is stuck in New York in a trial where she is trying to explain to the judge about a pharmaceutical drug. And the judge is scratching their head going, I just don't understand what this means. But anyway, that's just me wanting my wife to come home. Anyway, I defer to John about the other filings.
That's spoken like a man. That's spoken like a man that's been on kid duty for a long time.
2 kids, 2 and 4. They're killing me.
That's spoken like a man who's worried his wife might see this video and has to make sure she knows that I miss her. That's just otherwise. So I'm the only single guy here. You know what's interesting? I didn't know if you guys noticed. I think our sites are the only 2 that reported on this whole case. This filing's Friday. I didn't see it anywhere else.
No, I actually.
That's interesting and peculiar. But anyways, just knowing, I guess we're the only nerds interested enough in this stuff. So
I guess so. Maybe everybody else knows we're on top of it. Who knows?
Yeah, or everybody else. Maybe I haven't seen the traffic figures yet. Maybe it was a mistake to post it. Who knows? We'll have to check into that. But on the again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. I'm not an expert in the law, so I'm not probably the guy to ask about this stuff. But my takeaway, and when I talk to other people about, my takeaway on it is I thought it was actually kind of interesting that they threw in the amount of antitrust in Northern California cases, because it's what an appeal to ego. Like, you guys are the experts on this. You guys cover the sports, antitrust, all that stuff. You're the guys who take care of this stuff. Why go to a lesser court when you guys are the pros? It kind of felt like that. I do remember too on the contract stuff. I think 100% the plaintiffs win on that argument, because there was a case a few years ago. I believe some restaurants were being there was an antitrust violation case being brought against some restaurants. I can't remember the name of the case, but they won on taking it to arbitration, because it specifically laid out in the contracts that they had that you had to go to arbitration for any sort of antitrust or any violation case like that. The UFC didn't include that as part of and so I think they fail completely to meet that. Personally, I think the fairest would be to move the whole thing to like Southern California, a middle ground between the two, because obviously the worry is that people are worried about it going to the UFC, to Nevada, because they're worried Nevada's a friendly court for businesses in Nevada, that they're pro-business side, and people are worried that they're pro-plaintiff in antitrust case in Northern California. To me, a Southern California case, conveniently located near me and Paul, would be the perfect location for something like this to be handled. On the motion to dismiss, one of the interesting things I found in it was they didn't add anything new, but they clarified a few things. I thought they didn't get specific, but they did kind of like rewrite it and clarify the idea that what an elite MMA fighter is, and they included some language describing. I'm surprised they didn't use the Bellator line from the injunction. I thought that would be a good one to include. I'm surprised they didn't include that, but they included stuff from the Moody's they included, and they also included the mentions of stuff the UFC, how they've described their fighters as the best or elite or whatever. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And my guess on the monopoly charge is, I wonder if part of the reason they include the monopoly charge is just by the horizontal guidelines. It's easy to prove the UFC has a monopoly if you limit the relevant market just to MMA.
Well,
and
yeah,
I wonder if that's the reason.
The economist in me is going to say it's easy to prove anyone has a monopoly if you limit the relevant market really small.
Oh yeah, well, the Fleer. Well, they mentioned, it's funny. They also mentioned Fleer versus Topps. Did you see what the relevant market in that case was? The relevant market in Fleer versus Topps is pocket-sized cards that are sold sometimes with candy for 10 to 15 cents. I'm like, holy shit! No wonder they have a monopoly over that market. I can't believe there isn't a market for that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But I'm not saying I don't think they'll win. Like we said before, I don't think they'll win a monopoly charge in the sense that it affects consumers. And reading it, and again, you're the economist and you're the lawyer, so both of you guys can prove me wrong. It seems like they're laying out the monopoly charge in the sense that because they gain a monopoly over this relevant market MMA or elite MMA, in the future they might not win damages of that, but that's saying because they won this monopoly, that's where their monopsony comes in.
Yeah.
And it's easy to prove they have a monopoly over that, and then you can say, okay, we segue from that monopoly over this market to say, hey, that's how. If they have monopoly over this market, which we can demonstrate through using horizontal guidelines, that they have like 80%, 90% of the market, and they can raise pay-per-views 10% and no one cares, then we can just pivot a little bit and say, no, that's the monopsony. Now let's go to monopsony. It makes it easier for them. I don't know if that's wrong, but that just seems to me that's the way I interpret it. That I don't think they win the case in the sense that us, the consumers, aren't being damaged, but it just shows the control they have over that market.
So
tell me why I'm wrong, Paul.
No, there's a lot to get there. Yeah. So the question though is, how much of this will be okay for a motion to dismiss, and how much of this can just be addressed later, right? Because I'm not exactly sure what will be relevant for the motion to dismiss and what will be irrelevant. I will say that I think whoever wrote that paragraph about monopoly leading to monopsony and so on and so forth, I think it looks like they delegated that to the intern or something like that. When we get to the guts of this case, that will get destroyed. But the reason why is they started by saying, well, you're limiting competitors' access to fighters, which led to monopoly, which then led to monopsony, which then led to limiting competitors' access to fighters, and you're like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. The whole thing, when you look at sort of the logical consistency of it, doesn't make sense, and they don't need it. You don't need the monopoly story to have a monopsony story with limiting competitors' access to fighters. You don't need that other thing there. I still think that they're doing it because right now there's no harm of doing it. I cannot wait to see if the judge actually reads that story and buys into it. I think when it gets to the experts, it will definitely go away. But so, what else is there? Oh, the question is it relevant? Is it relevant for the motion to dismiss? Will it survive the motion to dismiss? And I don't know the answer to that. I know that eventually it will change. That is 100% guaranteed.
I think I mean, so just by making the argument that UFC owns 70 to 80% of the market, you can't argue with that. They own almost all the MMA market, so it's like, okay, they own that. They can raise pay-per-view prices. They recently did, and it doesn't affect their market. So they could just make it that easy an argument, just jump to the next thing and say the UFC has a monopoly. A judge who hasn't investigated yet, or someone who doesn't know much about MMA, look at it and go, you know what? That's a pretty strong argument right there. We're not going to investigate it further yet. Later it might get thrown out, but just on the motion to dismiss, like, you've made a plausible argument now. That's a plausible argument that someone owns a market because you've shown that. And let's move on. Let's move past this. The plausibility barrier, which Bell Atlantic versus Twimbly demands. So I think that part, after it might get destroyed, but we just got to make that. They're trying to get that past that hurdle.
Right. And real quick, one other thing I'd throw in is what you saw from the UFC when they did their motion to dismiss and they attacked the plaintiff's relevant market. The main thing they focused on there was what elite MMA fighters was. I don't know if you noticed that. They didn't do much attacking in the monopoly area of this is professional mixed martial arts, but we have to compete against boxing, but we have to compete against going to the movies, we have to compete against all those other things. They didn't do any of that. So I'm actually interested to see if they're going to address that in there. They get one more shot, right? They get a response. I think
it's their reply.
Yeah, they do it right before Mayweather Saturday. Thanks for that, guys. That'll be all you, John, because I'm going to be in Vegas and I'm not working.
I got stuff. I'm gonna be busy with boxing and stuff. And people that are dying to know about antitrust decisions. We'll have to wait a few days. So, that's one interesting too. I mean, I thought they made a better argument with the elite MMA fighters, even though it was so vague. But they did a better job of linking it to one of my favorite cases I've been bringing up for years, is the International Boxing Club of New York versus the U.S. And also just that there's this. There seems to be some concept out there already that there's something called an elite MMA fighter, even though it's not called that, through advertising, through how people market fighters. The other thing interesting, and you talked about earlier, is I thought the mistake the UFC made in their original response, their motion to dismiss, was they attacked too much the individual elements. Which I guess they have to. They're trying to draw out specificity by the plaintiffs. But the Carlos Newton, as you've now termed monopoly broth, is the idea that, which is the idea that the UFC's monopoly is not gained by just bad contracts or these contracts that have these provisions. They're gained by the fact that UFC also does all these other elements put together. So you can't say, oh, our contracts are the same as Bellator. Okay, they're the same as Bellator, but then you do this, and then someone else does that. Then you do this, and the idea is it's a web altogether, a broth of all these elements thrown together that gives them the monopoly charge. Which I don't know if that'll stick or whatever, but it's long-standing practice. So I guess the argument is we get past motion. Their argument is, hey, we need discovery to prove this stuff, and just get us past the motion to dismiss. So we'll see. Right. I'll be intrigued how the UFC responds. Jason, did you I mean, you're more familiar. You're more a legal expert than either of us. What was your thoughts?
I think that all they have to do is just create that issue fact so that it could survive the motion to dismiss. I think that's essentially what is happening here. And I haven't looked over their responsibility briefs as intently, but I do think that they do make viable arguments. And I think that my quote about sometimes some of the best legal theories come out of dumb luck. Could apply to that elongated tale of a monopoly.
I want to put that on my wall, like as a inspirational mode. We should really quick too, and this is advanced. All the people in the comments section all the time, and I just want to be clear: the people that seem to get very upset at us whenever we publish something on this, or other people. None of us. No one out there, I don't think the three of us, no one out there knows what's going to happen in the sense that we don't know if the allegations are really true because we don't have access to the information. The plaintiffs are making an allegation. They might know behind the scenes stuff that the UFC did that they know will prove their case. That's true. The UFC might not have done anything. This might be a wild goose chase. That's true too. We don't know. We're just basing on the fact that these are allegations against the UFC, and the UFC is defending against the allegations. That was my rant towards the people that just seem to be very upset whenever.
we get these people taking strong sides, like, oh, this case is
I know.
weak. Oh, the UFC is dead.
Yeah, this is the UFC. This stuff should be tossed out tomorrow. There's no case here. I'm like, oh, okay, there's no case to be tossed out. We don't have to worry if there's a case, But man, and you can't even read MMA Payouts comments because I don't know what happened to that site.
It's a virtual Lord of the Flies. No, I'll be honest.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's anyways. That was my segue into distraction there. Yeah, but it's again the good thing about this case. It'll keep us something to write about for a long time because they don't go away quick.
Yeah, totally. The interesting thing is going to be once getting past this motion to dismiss phase, or actually taking what's happening and look at it from a motion to dismiss perspective, but also thinking about the merits of the case, because just a lot of what you see, a lot of what the plaintiffs are doing right now is like so for instance in the relevant market, right? They put all those facts out there, about Moody's and statements from the UFC website. And it'll be interesting to see, does that help get through the motion to dismiss, but will it help you later, right? Because once you actually get to determining the relevant market and the actual guts of the case, that sort of stuff isn't going to be as important, right? It's going to be more about the substitutability argument that you've been hearing about every once in a while, right? But so that's the interesting thing when you see this stuff. Oh, from the media understands what an elite MMA fighter is, and here's a bunch of citations. Will that help in the motion to dismiss? Because it was not going to help that much later, but it might help them right now.
Yeah, that was my thinking. I mean, that's the part that always gets me about a lot of people is like, in the future, none of this might matter. The whole point of these weird, what we laugh at some of these comments and stuff is just to get past the motion to dismiss to show plausibility that, And I'll ask you, both of you guys, what you think the chances of it passing. I personally think the motion to dismiss. I personally think it passes motion to dismiss going forward, but the venue one, I give a 50-50 chance. I flip a coin. I'll give the response was pretty good, so I'll give the plaintiffs a 51% chance it stays in NorCal.
I actually I had initially, I think on our first show, said that it was going to be transferred to Nevada. Yep. And now, reading their opposition brief, I am pretty persuaded that San Jose may just keep this case and it stays there. With the motion to dismiss, I don't know. I'll have to reserve judgment on that. I have to reread it to see how they do, and then maybe the reply brief and see what goes from there.
So I think getting past motion to dismiss is probably like over 90% or more. I think we'll get through that. I still stay on record that I think overall I think all those the Carlos Newton, right? Mm-hmm. The foreclosing venues, foreclosing TV networks, foreclosing sponsors. I think that will eventually go away. And when I say eventually go away, it could be at the very end that it sort of goes away. But
Yeah.
I think all those the UFC will eventually win. I think monopoly they'll eventually win. I think the thrust of this case is going to be that monopsony argument about what's the relevant market for fighter services and using exclusive contracts to keep them from being accessed by competitors. That is where the real heart of this case will be. So, but I think it'll get past motion to dismiss. And I agree with Jason and you on motion to transfer venue. The more I look at it, I think that since this is an antitrust case, it's separate from those employment contracts. And the more that I read the arguments, I think that it's got a good chance, above 50%, a good chance of staying in Northern California. And perhaps the reason Nevada has so few is that Northern California keeps hold of them. Although also, sort of what businesses are there to have an antitrust case in Nevada? No offense, Nevada.
You know, and thinking about it even more, the fact that you know, Northern California does so many antitrust lawsuits, that they'll be able to look through this this argument regarding the forum selection clause in the contract and say, no, it doesn't really apply because it's an antitrust case, since they do have that experience. So there you go. I've been persuaded now. I've flip-flopped.
We should hope they stay in Northern California just because apparently they're 25% faster. And so we'll get everybody out there will get more stuff, more information quicker.
More bang for your buck.
Well, I like your Southern California argument the best. Your Southern California argument's clearly the best.
Yeah. I think the venue thing, I wonder if it is because it's so easy to kind of bring up evidence about the venue thing because people like the Tito comment over the summer about Bellator being blocked. It might not play a part in the later suit, you know, because there's so many options, but it's something like they can just for the plausibility just point to and say, we've got plenty of people saying that they were blocked from a venue by the UFC and that they can just bring that forward just to get past that motion to dismiss phase, bring the case forward. That's part of my thinking about the stadium, you know, they're part of the complaint about the stadiums.
It's one of those things that if you lose eventually, it's like no harm, no foul too. Okay, it just goes away. Doesn't make you look that bad, I don't think. Yeah, well, now, speaking of antitrust and you know, the UFC being monopoly, and there's no market for fighters. Apparently, there is a market for Phil Davis, who just signed with Bellator, which it doesn't quite affect the suit because it takes place outside the class period, but and I guess one fight or two doesn't change much, but does it herald an era of free agency? I guess that's the question everybody's wondering. Is this a sign of things to come, that the new Scott Coker Bellator is going to be able to go out and draw in fighters from the UFC that maybe be disgruntled, want more pay, or don't like, you know, we hear about this, that people aren't happy with the Reebok deal, various other things that they're going to test the market, but we haven't seen that much before. Every year there might be one guy that does it. Is this a sign of the times? Is this a new era? Start with you, Paul. I think it's a good sign for fighters. That's for sure. I mean, you know, the economics of it are that you don't always need that many other options out there. If people are bidding for your services, one other strong bidder can be really powerful. And one thing that you know, we've all wondered is how powerful have these forces been when fighters are just negotiating with the UFC, the possibility of trying to get another offer from someone else. But if you can actually go out there and get one, that's even stronger. And I think I was reading like that maybe Ben Henderson's going to do it after his next fight, something like that.
The last one on
all I know is for sure I would love to see more fighters doing it. I mean, part of it is, you know, if you're a restricted free agent and you want more money, you've got to go out there like NFL players do and like NBA players do and actually use your restricted free agency. You know, if you've got it and you don't use it, that's partially on you. So I like seeing the fact that it looks like we might be seeing more of these guys doing it. And that's what happens when you start getting other options and getting a little bit of competition now. So I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't know if this is going to be a really strong thing, if everybody's going to start doing it, but it's definitely a positive sign, and I would love to see more fighters doing it.
I wonder, before you two, Jason, I'll ask a question to you two, Jason. one of the things too is like Gilbert Melendez was restrained by the matching clause. Going forward, do you think the antitrust suit, the fact that it's very out there, might make the UFC hesitant to match as much as they might have in the past if a bigger name goes out?
Uh, I don't think so. I think maybe they're a little more choosy as to who they take. Obviously, Benson Henderson has one more fight under his current UFC contract, I believe, and he test the free agency market? It'll be interesting. I think that what the Phil Davis signing shows is that there is a little bit of leverage there for fighters out there, that there is another place to go to. One thing that you just look at what public information you have. You compare like last week's Bellator 136 salaries versus someone else's, versus any UFC salaries, and you do see that the UFC does pay more. Now, I don't know what Davis's current deal is, but if Bellator or Viacom were to up their payments for for someone like a Benson Henderson or maybe Phil Davis or something like that, then we could see some competition here. But I still think that the UFC, even though they are under a little more scrutiny here, they'll pick and choose who they want to retain. And I do think that Henderson is somebody that they do want to retain.
I think you brought up a good point and a good question, I guess. People making a big deal about this signing by Bellator, I guess the big question is, what did Phil Davis get? Because he's coming off a 2-fight losing streak, isn't it? If the UFC really made no offer, his wages, for all we know, could have actually gone down. Bellator might have offered him less than what he made the UFC. We don't know if this was the better option or if the UFC just basically retreated from making him any offer, so Bellator was the best option. And so that's a potential. Yeah.
Let me throw that in there. That's one thing I meant to say and forgot, that it would have been nice to have seen both companies make offers and then Bellator end up winning.
Yeah.
The UFC declining to match or something like that. That would have been a great signal. Or something like that happens with Ben Henderson. That would be a great signal. But yeah, the fact that the UFC essentially showed they didn't want him sort of goes to this not being a huge deal right away. But the nice thing about it is that it's public. Right, it's out there and people are hearing about it. So at least from that perspective, it's a good thing.
I think Bellator, if they're smart and they did give him a big offer, would leak what they paid him and actually pay him above what he asked, because just for the publicity of getting the message out to other fighters is that we are in the market for free agents, because they have to entice people to try the market. If people are afraid to try the market and don't know that don't know if there's a better deal waiting for them, they're not gonna try the free market. And so they have to do something to send the message out that we are really in the lookout for top fighters. And if you get on the market, we will make you an offer, a good offer. So
I agree.
I don't know how they.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, Jason. Did we lose your mic?
No, I'm good. I was just being quiet. I was just gonna agree with you guys. So go ahead.
I like that when you agree with me. That was good.
The other potential positive here, right, is the what's it called? The uniforms. The uniform clause is kicking in soon, right?
Yep.
In a few months, and so anything you get on the news, hey, we're Bellator, we're available for fighters, and if the UFC has these uniform restrictions, we don't. Right, that can be good because some people are waiting, right? Some fighters are waiting to see how are they really going to be affected by these uniform rules, and that if a significant chunk of fighters is motivated after they see what happens to their paycheck to leave, then the fact that this is in the news and is going on, it could be a real positive for Bellator going forward.
What's fascinating about the uniform is I talked to, in the last 2 weeks, I think 12 managers and fighters, and we're talking some of the top guys. No one, I believe no one has a clue what the uniform deal is yet. Are we 2 months from the uniform deal? Would you think the top people in the business would know that your top stars, your top fighters, your top managers would have an inkling what's going to happen? And so I found that kind of interesting. So I know a lot of people are just waiting on pins and needles to find out what the full details are. For the uniform deal, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I think the uniform deal is going to be it might push a lot of guys that are very well renowned and notorious fighters with notoriety, I should say, as they like to phrase it, fighters with notoriety, but who aren't highly ranked or who already get great deals from certain sponsors to maybe try free agency. But I think if the rumors and whatever the information we're getting behind the scenes is accurate, a lot of new fighters are going to want to sign the UFC because that's basically an extra like $5,000 check that they'll have in their pocket. So their purses have gone up $5,000. So you're going to get a lot of guys signing into the UFC and then getting under those restrictive MMA contracts that allow them to retain them longer just because they get access to that $5,000 bump. So it plays both parts. It'll draw probably more guys to UFC, but it might cause a lot of the older veterans that might not but lose out a lot on sponsorship deal to start thinking about maybe testing Bellator.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if you do have established sponsors and they want to follow you and for the same amount of money to go to Bellator, then then there might be some opening there. If you're like someone who's making six figures off of your sponsorship deals and whatnot, and you have good relationships with them, and you're okay to go to Bellator, I could see that being in the fighter's court there, as far as leverage goes.
I'm trying to think, what would the lightweight version of Tito versus Bonner be? Who could Bellator pick up?
Jens Paul, I guess Benson Henderson, if he came out and fought.
He's a little bit more than Tito. Come on now.
Yeah. No, Benson. Oh, yeah. I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody. I feel bad. I don't think there is. I mean, that's the problem. Lightweight doesn't have that kind of fighter. That lightweight. BJ Penn. You have to bring BJ Penn back.
There you go. That's a good one.
BJ Penn versus Shinya Aoki. That would be two guys I loved. I'd watch it though because those are grappling aces. That'd be an amazing. That's not the same thing.
I don't know. BJ Penn hasn't grappled in MMA in forever, right? I mean, when was the last time? That was one of the things that used to drive me crazy. Just sit there and get blasted on his feet towards the end of his career.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Right. I'd be jonesing for that fight. If someone offered me that, I'd be all over it. That wouldn't be.
I would too, and then I would be frustrated when BJ stood and struck the whole time.
I guess. Yeah, I'm curious at how much. I mean, Bellator, their revenue's not anywhere close to the UFC. I mean, people think like Viacom's behind them. Viacom is an umbrella with all different components, all with their set budget. Bellator doesn't have unlimited money. They're an asset to Viacom. So I'm curious at how much they're really able to spend. And so if they're able to spend, how many fighters, if they can only take a fighter at a time when they come up, how much they're willing to spend, because they might look at it and say, our rate of return is not that great on this one guy. We have no one to put him against. I mean, the best would be if all of California suddenly became a free agent. Then I could see a massive splash. If all the camps in California suddenly contracts were voided, then think of it. Then Bellator could pick and choose and say, if we take these two guys, we have these three guys, we can give you a fortune because we're going to do like a round robin tournament with you guys with one of our fighters. And I'm not 100% sold that the market's going to change that dramatically the way it's set up as it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't say overnight either, but I mean the problem is it's a chicken and egg problem, right? And so if you can't half-ass the chicken and egg strategy. So I'd imagine that Scott Coker is telling them we either need to be all in or nothing, right? But part of it would be investing in your scouting and development, right? Trying to get them before the UFC gets their hands on them. But then it's not really a strategy that you can half-ass. You either have to be committed. We're going to spend money and go after these free agents, or not, and you have to do well at it. You have to probably get lucky a few times. But I would imagine Scott Coker is telling them that we need to commit to this, and that eventually Viacom might pull the plug if it doesn't work. But you can't dink and dunk at it like you said. That's the worst thing to do.
Yeah. The risk too in this is so different than a couple of years ago. The risk, Viacom, they go in, the risk is so much greater because there's no guarantee that you're going to get a payoff on. You're going to have to pay higher wages to keep those fighters signing long-term contracts away from the UFC, and you're going to have to pay free agents higher wages to come to Bellator because they're going to look at it. You're not a proven commodity, and also there's even if you pay them the same as they get in the UFC, your returns are going to be less because you're only going to have a limited amount of fighters. You won't be able to put together big blockbuster fights. Get that rate of return for years. This is going to be something that's going to be commitment 3-4 years down the line.
Yeah, totally.
You know, so
that's exactly
it's a huge risk. It's even Strikeforce and other promoters have this risk because they could sign a fighter and say, oh, we can build up to a fight a year from now. And,
I mean, the history of other sports leagues tells us that it takes 3, 4, 5 years. Athlete wages, salaries start going up, and then sometimes, the problem is sometimes that other sports league will be in financial ruin and be about to go out of business, and the other one will eat it sort of back up. And the question is, will that happen here? Is there enough for 2 MMA promotions? And hopefully the answer is yes. But I mean, we've been down this street before in sports. We see it all the time with competing leagues.
Except, only in football, soccer does it seem to coexist, but that's regional.
Yeah, well, what are you talking about? U.S. soccer?
Well, not U.S., but Europe. In Europe, there are several leagues.
Oh yeah.
So,
I was gonna say, why would you be saying anything there? No, but I know what you mean. Jason, you're back. We lost you for a second.
Yeah, I fell off, but I recovered.
Yeah, we covered for you though. See that how we went smoothly the whole time without no one noticing.
All right. So I think we're right about at the 1 hour mark.
Yeah, we should go. Jace was going to give us an update, weren't you, about New York? Since
you're
the only one that knows what's going on.
Yeah, well, if anyone was looking for another lawsuit, don't look to the state of New York because the UFC has lost its long-battled lawsuit to try to overturn the legislation in New York, which bans professional MMA in the state. Essentially, last month, the court dismissed the final claim by Zuffa, which claimed that the legislation was unconstitutionally vague. Essentially, the court just said that they lacked standing. There was no evidence put forth which said that they had challenged the lawsuit and anyone from the state of New York had attempted to enforce the lawsuit. So basically there was no event where like Zuffa or any other professional MMA organization tried to hold something and then the AG or New York came in and tried to shut it down. So there was actually none of that happening. So the court said that since there's no injury because you never attempted this, there's no standing, and therefore your lawsuit is over. What I found interesting in that opinion was the court saying that there was a lot of claims Zuffa made that occurred after the lawsuit was filed, and the court said, well, those are viable arguments. However, those happened post-lawsuit filing. So those things might happen, but you have to bring it in another lawsuit. Other thing is, the court said in basically what's called dicta, which is kind of the court's opinion but not legal authority, indicates that if you want to bring this lawsuit again, bring it in a state court action and not in a federal court. Basically saying, don't come back here. So essentially what it breaks down to is there's a lot more onus on what happens in Albany this spring with respect to proposing new legislation which would grant professional MMA in the sport. So, the UFC is going at it hard. If you recently saw that they are offering a grassroots campaign by signing an online petition, and you get 1 month free of Fight Pass for New Yorkers only. That's the only catch. So they're going at it hard, and hopefully with a new regime up in Albany, it'll actually come to a vote in the assembly.
All right. Wait, don't you get 1 month free of Fight Pass anyway?
No, you get like 7 days. So the 1 month is actually pretty good. So if you have friends that are in New York, sign the petition. But again, the thing about the petition, it really doesn't do anything really. I mean, it just kind of mobilizes people to say, hey, we had X amount of people sign the petition. Not saying that they're offering the carrot to people, but they're just indicating that. I think, though, they're hammering a lot of good points in regarding the economic influx of money that would come in. So they've got a lot of business groups that are advocating for them now. We'll see how it goes. But the lawsuit is over, so they're not going to go to there. I don't think there's going to be an appeal, and I think that their best bet will be just to try to get a new law passed.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. She was like, "Get out of my courtroom." Attaboy, go get him.
Yeah. You could take that. You don't have to leave, but you got to get out of here.
I know. Yeah. So, and if you're listening, I would definitely take that free month of Fight Pass and use it on Edgar versus Faber. That's a no-brainer right there.
Is that a Fight Pass or FS1?
Yeah. It should be Fight Pass in the Philippines.
Oh wow. Yeah. And then there's another one coming up in June. That's Fight Pass only. Berlin.
Yeah. There's definitely no Edgar versus Faber. That headliner.
Yeah, Edgar Faber. It's gonna be good.
I think it's. I like that they do. I mean, I don't know if I like it, but I think it's smart that they add. It seems that they're sprinkling some very good fights into Fight Pass, just make it more enticing. It makes makes Fox Sports fare not quite as enticing, but they've done they do 4 card. Eventually I think they'll do 4 or 5 near pay-per-view quality Fight Pass cards, make it a must-have instead of just this check out what's going on in Berlin at 3 a.m. pass.
I think Fight Pass will be like the HBO. It's like, you don't really need it all year round, but you keep it around because there's that, you got Game of Thrones or something, your Sopranos or your one show that you want, it's going to come up, so you don't want to cancel it yet. So that's what I kind of think of it's going to be.
Are you going to say they're going to bring back Dana White's Boston show and put it on Fight Pass? Has that idea, the Boston Mafia show that he wanted to do for years?
Why not?
Original content. Yeah, they'll bring back that, and maybe they'll do the promoter, that pitch they had before they did the Ultimate Fighter, put that on Fight Pass, and that'll be the.
I know they're going around trying to get a bunch of amateur content too. They're trying to take over the content world. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, they need content. They want people. It's You want stuff on it 24/7, I guess. That was wasn't that the complaint about that wasn't that the reason the WWE went up and bought up all the libraries and stuff? They wanted nonstop content. They're doing
nonstop content, yeah.
So
problem is, I think they're going to some of the amateur guys and saying, hey, we'll give you eyeballs, give us your stuff for free, and they're having to. The tough thing is, do you do that, or do you stick to your guns and say, no, I own this, you got to pay me a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I just talked to some promoters about that, and that's the catch-22 is that TV content, your expenses skyrocket to actually put on TV, and no one wants to pay much for MMA for most promotions. But so if you're trying to make the promoter is trying to make the product for TV, they're often just gonna get gonna lose their shirt. The trick is to try to find a TV partner or whatever, or some sort of medium promotion that is just advertised to get people to the live show. But if you're on TV, who wants to come to the live show? That's the catch-22. You put on TV to get people to know about that you do live shows, but then no one wants to come to the live show because it's on TV.
Right. One day delayed. There you go.
Yeah, it's a ruthless business. That's So I guess anything else? That's it, I think, for this month. I should say.
I think so. All right, thanks for hanging in there, everyone. We should be back probably sometime next month once a few more new things come up, and you'll see us again. I don't know if you want to, but you'll see us again, giving our business and legal perspective for you on these issues. Hope you enjoyed today.